Okay guys, moment of truth. We pulled apart the ACK connector and took a hard look, and I'm going to bring you along to show you what we found. Injector number 3, the brown and yellow wire, was indeed backed out, and when we pulled the ACK connector apart and we took a look at all 60 pins, with the locks out. The locks are not on the pin themselves, they're actually on the ACK harness connector, the gray connector that goes inside the computer here. Get you a shot of that. So you can see I wrote on the pin number there, 20 or whatever. That's the ACK harness connector that slides into the ACK computer. Where it says GTE upside down, that's the computer itself. And what I found was these 3 little pieces of plastic. These are the fingers that hold the pins from coming out. I found 3 broke ones. One is the one we were looking for. The other 2, one was actually in an unused hole, so that one's not a problem. And then the third one was in the Thermactor air bypass pin for the air pump. The interesting thing about that was when we looked it up, the air pump solenoid wire, the bypass wire, is not supposed to be in the hole that it's in this car. So what's happened is we have an 88 speed density car that has been converted with the highest of quality Scotch lock connectors here to mass air. And for you guys curious about that, here's what that's about. The mass air conversion kits sell you this junky trailer wiring harness, and it adds 4 wires to the ACK for the mass airflow sensor. And 2 of them are power and ground. They have tapped into that here. Let's see if I can get you a shot of that. They've tapped into the power and ground going to the computer, so every time the computer gets power and ground, so does the new mass airflow sensor that they added. And they use the Scotch lock connector, and as you can see, you got, luckily this is a ground wire, but they've got bare wire that's been exposed, probably clipped at some point by the bolt. Scotch lock connector takes up too much room, so the black harness cover that goes over this normally can't be there. This is the other end of the wire they didn't bother to use. And on the red, they didn't do much better. I can see some cuts in the wire up in here. That's not too cool, especially on a power wire. This is the mass air trailer wiring. And they did a better job of using clear heat shrink, and I don't see any solder in there, but they apparently twist tied and heat shrunk the mass air signal and mass air ground wires, and T-tapped the mass air power and ground wires. So that's not too slick. Out of the 3 pins that are connected, only 2 are used. One is the injector wire that we were worried about. The other one was the Thermactor air bypass solenoid. That might be more problematic than it sounds like. I got to do more research here, because the 87-88 harness is pinned out differently for the air pump than the 89 to 93 cars, which is what the computer they use for the mass air conversions is. A9P is an automatic Fox body 89 to 93 computer. So the problem there is that if the Thermactor air bypass solenoid doesn't work correctly, it's possible that the air is pumped into the back of the cylinder head by the air pump, even if the engine's not cold. When it's cold, the O2 sensors aren't working, and it doesn't much matter, so they pump it to the back of the head for better emissions. But when it gets warm, they can't do that, because where they're pumping it in the back of the head would be upstream of the O2 sensors. The O2 sensors would see the air pump oxygen being pumped in, mistake it for a lean condition, and richen the motor up tremendously and unnecessarily. So I don't know if that's the case, but we're going to have to check that out. That's definitely a potential problem with not correctly converting and repinning certain wires on this mass air harness. So essentially, I need to compare the 86 to 88 harness very closely to the 89 to 93 harness to find out what needs to be repinned before I put this back together. But that is not the problem of the day. The problem of the day is the injectors. And so we need to find out if the injector pin can be shoved in and fixed. I forgot I need to connect this ground wire back up. And we can check it out and see. This ground wire actually is the ground for the shield for some of the ignition stuff and for the PCM case. It's not the most important ground wire, but it's one of 3. And it needs to be there. Okay. Alright, bless it. Got the wrong socket. In just a minute, I'm going to fire it up. I already took in order to fix this temporarily, I took the injector number 3 wire that was getting poked out by the lack of tab on the harness connector and just poked it in there manually until it's seated into the computer. So it is a fix, but what's going to happen is every time you take the computer out of the car, that wire is going to back out and not follow back in. So the ultimate repair for this car to make it permanently fixed would be to change out the PCM harness connector, which means depinning all 60 wires, getting a used connector that's good, and putting these wires into a different connector. So the question is, did we just fix it? We'll find out. Well, scope says it's fixed. Let's try the test light. That's a fix, ladies and gentlemen. EC harness connector failure.